Alright, so we're up to week number 13 in the simulated match week in MLS this season. We have 11 games to talk about, which means that I don't have to switch the board 3 times. And that this is the first time in a while since we don't actually have a midweek game. So, yeah, that means this video should be a little bit shorter than the one that I previously done. But with that being said, let us get into the first game, which is probably one of the biggest surprise of the week. And I know you're probably thinking, how is Montreal versus the San Jose Earthquakes, with the Quakes winning 2-1, is one of the biggest surprise of the week? Isn't this just two teams that is not having a very good season, just kind of battling out to see who potentially can get their fans false hope, the fact that they make the playoffs? Well, yes, that is kind of the case. But at the same time, this is something that the Quakes have not done since 2015. It's been 5 years since they have won back-to-back road games. And even though I know this one was probably a game that they could finally break that streak of not winning back-to-back road games since 2015, I didn't think that they were going to do it, because we've seen it before where there was time where they could have won back-to-back road games and it didn't happen. But it finally happened in this game, and it all started with Andy Rios, who has surprisingly been a guy that has been a lethal goal scorer for the Quakes, and kind of started to prove that move that we made last season by getting him wasn't actually a mistake. Scores in the 10th minute to give the Quakes a 1-0 lead. Another guy that has started to find his goal scoring form is Danny Houston, who again scored in this game to give the Quakes a 2-0 lead and end up to be the winning goal of this game. Sofia Taidia did get one back for Montreal in the 43rd minute, but Montreal wasn't able to mount a comeback in the second half, as the Quakes, again, a very impressive 2-1 victory. First time since 2015 they won back-to-back road games, and as I said before, I want to have some hope the fact that the Quakes could potentially mount some sort of comeback to charge up the table. I mean, they're only 5 points off the playoff line, but as I said before, this is just kind of a game that gives fans false hope, the fact that the team can do well, and that unless if the Quakes continue to go on this incredible winning streak to charge up the table, I'm not so sure if this is just kind of a fluke and that they're going to go back to their losing way in the upcoming weeks. But that being said, moving on into the next game is RSL and the Galaxy, and boy, does Real Salt Lake need this one. Like, after back-to-back losses that they suffered last week, and after just a rough week where they lost to the Quakes at home and to Minnesota on the road, they were able to get a 1-0 lead against the Galaxy. The only goal came in the 71st minute, with Nick Beasler was able to head in a header to give RSL the 1-0 lead and ultimately the winning goal of this game, as RSL, because of the fact that, as I mentioned a little bit later, that Seattle lost their game, they retake second place in the Western Conference, while the Galaxy, the struggle continues with the fact that this team is continuing to show that they are very inconsistent, and I won't be surprised in the next match they're probably going to win the next match to kind of show that inconsistent form. But that being said, moving on into the next match is Dallas and the Whitecaps. So Dallas, of course, got the free win of the week by playing against the Whitecaps, although they kind of had to earn this free points from the Whitecaps, as the Whitecaps actually put up a fight against Dallas in this game. And it all started in the 17th minute when Vancouver took a surprising 1-0 lead from David Milenkovic. Up until that point, Dallas was dominating the game, but Vancouver somehow was able to score on their first shot on goal. But Dallas eventually did get rewarded of all their dominance just 8 minutes later from Matt Hedges. Before 10 minutes later, it happened again. Despite the fact that Dallas was dominating the game, Jordi Reyna somehow, in some way, was able to fire home the Whitecaps' second goal and give them the lead for the second time of this game. But unfortunately, that lead, like last time, did not last very long, as 4 minutes later, it's the Cobra. Zdeněk Odrosic scores to tie the game up at 2 apiece for Dallas. Before in the second half, Dallas again completely controlling the game and eventually was rewarded with that complete control when Jesus buries the winning goal of the game to make it 3-2. Then Michael Barrios basically put the cherry on top in the 90th minute as Dallas was able to win 4-2 against the Vancouver Whitecaps. And again, they had to really work for this one because they found themselves down a couple of times in this game, but ultimately they were able to take advantage of a Whitecaps team that basically is handing gifts to every single MLS team. Like, if you cannot get 3 points against the Whitecaps, something is definitely wrong with the team. And that's no disrespect to the Whitecaps, but they are by far one of, if not the worst team in the league, with the way that they have only got 5 points this season, and they're just being cemented right at the bottom of the Western Conference. But that being said, moving on into the next match is Toronto and New England. So last time both of these teams play each other, it was New England getting the victory over TFC. This time TFC was able to get some revenge as they won 2-1 in this game, and boy, does Toronto need this win. Like, they were really heading into kind of a cliffhanger, and that they were really dropping like a stone in the Eastern Conference, but this was a massive win to keep them above the red line. And they got the first goal from Marky Delgado right on the stroke of halftime in the 45th minute to give them a 1-0 lead. Then Jonathan Osorio would double that lead in the 58th minute before Pineda did make things interesting for New England by scoring in the 64th minute, but the refs wasn't able to complete the comeback as TFC big 2-1 victory on the road to keep themselves above the red line. And for New England, they're finding the same situation that Toronto has been dealing with the last couple of weeks, where this is a team that has been having a very inconsistent run. All of a sudden, they're started to lose a couple of games, and that inconsistent run isn't really inconsistent anymore, and that instead it's gone into just a pretty bad run that they are on right now, and that as a result of that, they are near the foot of the Eastern Conference. But that being said, speaking of, or moving on into the next match, is the Atlantic Cup between the Redbulls and DC. And speaking of bad teams, both of these teams are definitely not having the best of the season, and it looked like this was potentially going to be a 1-1 draw that doesn't really help either of this team. Florian Valette scores in the 19th minute to give the Redbulls a 1-0 lead before Julian Gresso ties it up in the 65th minute to tie the game up at 1 apiece. And as I said, just as we thought that this was going to end 1 apiece, Paul Arriola was able to score the winning goals. And in reality, Paul Arriola unfortunately suffered from a torn ACL. But let's just say in this simulated virtual alternative world, that Paul Arriola never suffered that torn ACL, and that he's kind of a little bit underachieving this season for DC, but finally he shows up in this big moment to give DC all 3 points in this Atlantic Cup between them and the Redbulls. And DC, with this big win, they're still below the red line, but at least they're keeping chase and trying to put pressure on teams above them to get above the red line. And for the Redbulls, this has to be a very tough loss, considering the fact that they dropped all 3 points at home, and that they could have had a point in this game if they didn't concede a late goal in this one. But that being said, moving on into the next match is probably the biggest surprise of this week, which is Columbus, who, remember how this team was on just a miserable winless run that they were on, and they were finding themselves near the bottom of the Eastern Conference all this time? Well, all of a sudden, back-to-back wins, and now there's not only not in the bottom of the Eastern Conference, but they're actually above the red line, as they of course got a massive 3-2 win against Orlando City. And this was actually a pretty entertaining match too. Darlington Nagbe opened the scoring in the 11th minute. I think this is the first goal in a while that Darlington Nagbe has scored for Columbus. You talk about another guy that's been kind of a little bit disappointing and having a underachieving season. Nagbe is definitely one of those guys. He just doesn't seem like he has just rediscovered his magic that he had when he was with the Timbers and Atlanta when he comes to Columbus. Then we got Oriol Rosell ties the game up at 1 apiece. A guy that talk about a guy that hasn't scored in a long time. This is another guy that usually doesn't score a lot of goals, but he did score here to tie the game up at 1 apiece right on the stroke of halftime. Then Jonathan Mensah, another guy that doesn't score a lot of goals, but obviously, the reason why he doesn't score a lot of goals is because he's a center back for Columbus, and center back usually doesn't score a lot of goals. But he would then give Columbus the lead back to make it 2-1 in the 52nd minute before Dom Dwyer would tie the game up for the second time for Orlando City at 2 apiece in the 67th minute. Then 6 minutes later, Jerzy Zardes would retake the lead for Columbus for the third time, and this time they were able to hold on to the lead as they got a massive 3-2 win against Orlando City. And Columbus is just an example of what I've been saying about the Eastern Conference, where even though you're near the bottom of the Eastern Conference, as long as if you can get a couple of wins in a row, then you can find yourself above the red line. And especially how a lot of these Eastern Conference teams near the bottom seems to kind of slip up very easily and aren't able to win the game. There's been just kind of so much shuffling that is going on that it just makes it so easy that even if you win 2 games in a row, you can find yourself from being in 9th place in the Eastern Conference and shoot all the way up to 6th place in the Eastern Conference as the Columbus Crew is in after this week. But for Orlando City, not only this was a big missed opportunity of potentially catching the Union once again for that top spot, as I will mention later, the Union lost a game again this week, but all of a sudden they are getting caught up by a team that I'm going to mention next, which is FC Cincinnati, who all of a sudden are joining the party in terms of the battle for the top spot in the Eastern Conference, because they got a massive 2-1 win against Chicago in this game. They started the scoring in the 12th minute from Yaya Kubo before Chicago did tie it up from Przemysław Frankowski. But in the 61st minute, the red-hot Jurgen Lecaudia, who's been one of the most lethal goals scored in this league this season, was able to get the winning goal for FC Cincinnati. And with this win, FC Cincinnati is only 1 point behind Orlando City and 2 points against the Union or 2 points up behind the Union for that top spot in the Eastern Conference. And I don't think a lot of people would have saw this one coming. The fact that we're now in week number 13 and FC Cincinnati would be right on the doorstep of trying to become the best team in the Eastern Conference. Like, that has got to be one of the biggest turnaround I've ever seen with a team. Like, last season, I thought the Quakes, with how impressive their turnaround, and that at one point the Quakes find themselves like they're the top part of the Western Conference. I thought that was impressive. This is probably even more impressive with the way that, you know, FC Cincinnati, they look like they were probably going to be a doormat team again this season, and they have proved all their doubters wrong by charging up in Eastern Conference and putting some serious competition of potentially getting the top spot in the Eastern Conference. Whereas the Chicago Fire, yeah, they're not a team that is having putting some serious competition in the Eastern Conference, as once again they find themselves at the bottom of the Eastern Conference. And I think this is the first time ever for this season, or at least since I've done simulated match review, where Chicago actually become the first team to find themselves at the bottom of the table in consecutive weeks. Because it seemed like every single week the Eastern Conference, as I will mention later in the standings in this video, it seemed like that bottom spot in the Eastern Conference, it's just musical chair. Like, there seems like every single week there's a different team at the bottom of the Eastern Conference, and I kind of find that very funny with the way how much of a shit show the Eastern Conference is this year. But that being said, moving on in terms of the next match is the team that pretty much is untouchable. That, of course, is Minnesota United, and they show that untouchability again as they won 3-2 against the Portland Timber. Albeit, I will say this, the Loons, they didn't have a good game in this one against the Timbers, but at the same time, you know, when you are that team that is just untouchable this season, and that you still haven't lost your first game, sometimes even if you don't play very well in a game, you still end up with all 3 points in this one. Now, the Timbers got the opening goal in the 7th minute from Jimmy Chara, and you know that whenever the Timbers get their opening goal, you know that this is not a good sign if you're a Timbers fan, because we've been saying it many times this season. Whenever they get the opening goal, that means that they're probably going to concede a couple more of unanswered goal. Although this time it wasn't the case, even though technically in the 17th minute, Kevin Molino would tie the game up again, and then he would tie it, or he would give the go-ahead goal for the Loons right on the stroke of halftime to give them a 2-1 lead at halftime. Portland, for once, actually showed some fight back and actually got the equalizer in the 66th minute from Felipe Mora. But again, Minnesota, as I said many times this season, they are just on a different planet, and this team just seems like unbeatable, and they weren't going to be denied of all 3 points today against the Timbers, as Jan Gregush would score in the 79th minute to give them the winning goal in this one, as the Loons continue to extend that lead that they had in the Western Conference, which I believe right now it's a 10-point lead in the Western Conference. Like, that is just absolutely, like, that's kind of LAFC level of dominance that Minnesota is, and I think they are even more dominant than what LAFC was last year, because at least at this point, I think LAFC actually had less points than what Minnesota has, and that LAFC wasn't unbeaten heading into this month. I think LAFC, if I remember, heading up to this point, they've already lost twice this season. They lost to the Galaxy in El Tráfico and lost that surprising 1-0 defeat against the Vancouver Whitecaps of all team. But that being said, I am going to switch the boards right now and look at the last 3 games and also the standings after 13 weeks of simulated match in MLS. Speaking of team that has been untouchable lately, that exactly is what Sporting KC is, as they continue that hot streak against Seattle in this game as they won 4-1 against the Sounders. Jerso gets the opening goal scoring started for SKC in the 34th minute before Stefan Fry, who we always see this happen every single year where Stefan Fry does make one own goal, and it seemed like it has happened in this game as he basically just commits a complete goalkeeping howler to give SKC the second goal in this game. Now, Jordan Morris did get one back for the Sounders to make things a little bit interesting in this game, but Alan Pulido would get the third goal for SKC in the 75th minute before Ilie basically adds the 4th one in the last kick of the game, as SKC continue this hot streak and continue to just really become a team that what we should be expecting after what we saw in the first 2 games of the season, and that is a team that is untouchable, as they of course won against the Sounders in this game. And that, as I mentioned a couple of weeks, where I can't wait to see when RSL play against Minnesota, 2 of the top team in the league face off each other. Now I cannot wait until Sporting KC meet Minnesota in the upcoming match, because imagine, whenever that match is going to take place, you will have a Minnesota team that could be at that point unbeaten against an SKC team that probably would also be unbeaten heading all the way back into late April when they had that miserable run. And that would be just a heck of a matchup to see who exactly is going to stay unbeaten, or the fact that both teams probably will remain unbeaten if that game ends in a draw. But yeah, moving on, in terms of the next match, is another team that has been recently kind of hot and kind of been a little bit underappreciated in terms of the fact that they've been a very decent team this season. And that, of course, is the Colorado Rapids, who grabbed a massive 2-0 victory against the Union. And this game just kind of summarized why this season the Western Conference is clearly the better conference compared to the Eastern Conference. Like, standing-wise aside and the points total aside, this game, a Rapids team that, even though they're 4th in the table in the Western Conference, facing against a team at the top of the conference, it looked like they just completely dominated, and that the Union just completely got outmatched in this game by the Rapids. And in the 36th minute, Andre Shinishiki gets the opening goal for the Rapids to give them a 1-0 lead before Kai Kamara, another guy that has been red hot this season, and also another guy that I feel like he's been very underrated and pretty much underappreciated of how much goals that he has scored for this Rapids team. Scores again in the 59th minute to give a 2-0 lead, and that would be the final score of this game, as the Rapids keeping pace with some of those top team in the Western Conference with a massive win against the Union, who, the good news for the Union is, as I mentioned before, Orlando City lost their game, so they still are at the top of the Eastern Conference. The bad news is FC Cincinnati is coming, and FC Cincinnati, as I mentioned, if not only they gain ground in terms of the top spot of the Eastern Conference, but they're probably the biggest winner in terms of the Eastern Conference this week. And the fact that if they can win their next match, and that the Union and Orlando City lose their next match, FC Cincinnati is going to be at the top of the Eastern Conference. And I don't think out of any world, like if I would have told you that FC Cincinnati would be at the top of the Eastern Conference, you would probably think I am just crazy. But in this virtual simulated world, that's the world we're living in right now, and that FC Cincinnati might have just completed one of the greatest turnaround we have ever seen an MLS team done from the previous season heading into this season. But yeah, moving on into the last match of this week is the Battle of the Underachiever. So the reason why I say this is the Battle of the Underachiever is because both LAFC and NYCFC has clearly underachieved this season. Like, a lot of people, when they saw this match in the beginning of the season, they probably think this was a mouth-watering encounter because both of these teams would have been at the top of each of their conference, and that there's going to be some fireworks that is going to be shown in this game. And although there was definitely some fireworks with 4 goals happen in this game, it definitely was not expect the fact that both of these teams are just so mediocre this season that they're barely hanging on in terms of them making the playoffs and above the red line. And in fact, one of these teams are actually now below the red line, as I will mention later. And it's crazy the fact that I would say this team would at any point of the season would be below the red line, especially now we're so deep into the season now. Alexandro Matrita gets the opening goal for NYCFC in the 22nd minute before Carlos Vela scores to tie the game up at 1 apiece in the 57th minute. Keaton Parks then retake the lead for NYCFC in the 61st, but LAFC would equalize in the 73rd from Mark Anthony Kay. And yeah, just that is the final score of this game, as this draw definitely does not help either of these teams, and that either of these teams are not going to be feeling that they could maybe mount a little bit of a comeback and maybe a start of a streak so that they can charge themselves back up the table. But we shall see how each of these two teams is going to be for the rest of the season. But one thing's for sure, both of these teams have clearly underachieved heading into this season in this virtual world of simulation. But that being said, that is pretty much it for all the games that I've reviewed, which means that it's time to look at the standings from each of the conference. And we start off with the logjam that is the Eastern Conference, where it seemed like now there is 2 separate battles that is happening. There is now the battle of the top spot in the Eastern Conference and the battle for basically four through 12th place, because it's still only separated by 7 points between 4th place and dead last in the Eastern Conference. But in terms of the battle of the top spot in the Eastern Conference, we see the Union still at the top of the Eastern Conference with 22 points, but Orlando City right behind them with 21 points, and FC Cincinnati definitely right behind them with 20 points to their name. Before we got Atlanta currently having 17 points in 4th place, Toronto FC with 16 points, Columbus, who, as I said earlier, they were a team that were finding themselves near the bottom of the table for majority of the season, and look what happened 2 wins later. They're now 6th in the Eastern Conference. That's how crazy the Eastern Conference is and how much of a shit show it has gone on, where a team could go on a miserable winless run, and then 2 wins later they will find themselves above the red line. Then we got NYCFC and DC tied with 14 points in the last spot of the Eastern Conference for the playoffs. We got the Redbulls currently at 13 points, Montreal currently at 12 points in 10th place, New England currently at 11 points in 11th place, and then we have Chicago Fire, who, as I mentioned before, I think they're the first team since I started doing this review of the simulated match where they find themselves at the bottom in consecutive weeks, because it seemed like every single week there's a new team that is at the bottom of the Eastern Conference whenever I do this kind of video. Now, looking at the Western Conference, where it's pretty much a loaded Western Conference. Although one team that is definitely not feeling any pressure whatsoever is Minnesota. Yeah, I mean, they are basically like the LAFC of this season. I mean, they're miles ahead of everybody else, not only in the Supporters Shield standing, but also in the Western Conference, as they have 38 points this season, approaching 40 if they could win their next game, and they have a big 11-point gap over second place RSL, who of course retake that lead after Seattle lost this week and the Sounders dropped back down to third place. Then you got the Rapids at fourth place and Sporting KC at 22 points, and you can definitely see that there is started to be a little bit of a logjam between second and fifth place, and that teams are starting to group up each other. And I'll tell you what, I gotta feel sorry for Sporting KC, because I know I've been saying that they have just gone on a crazy run and they're charging up the table, but they seem like they've been stuck in fifth place for the last couple of weeks. And the reason why they're stuck at that position for so long is some of these teams above them are keep winning. And you know, the Western Conference is not like the Eastern Conference, where if you get a couple of wins in a row, you are going to boost your way up the table. In the Western Conference, you're going to have to work for it, because some of these teams are just so competitive that it is really hard to make up some ground and pass other teams if they just keep winning every single week, and that those are the team that is above you. So yeah, unfortunately Sporting KC has been kind of stuck in that middle part, but they are definitely catching up, and that if they can continue that winning streak and put more pressure on these top teams, they could definitely find themselves in the top two spot in the Western Conference. Then we got the Galaxy with 19 points before we got Dallas, and yes, LAFC currently below the red line with 18 points. I mean, I don't think I have ever... It doesn't feel real, the fact that LAFC is 18 point and below the red line. And I'm guessing at least LAFC fan can say that this is not the real world. This is just a virtual world that we're in. But even if this is still the virtual world that we are in, it's crazy to say that LAFC is below the red line. Consider this team, after what they had last season, should be a team that should be nowhere near of a team that is fighting for the last couple of spots of playoffs. Then you got the Quakes, who have now got themselves in 9th place, but the bad news is they're still 5 points back of LAFC, and there's still a big gap between them and 8th place, and trying to compete for the playoffs with 13 points. We got the Dynamo currently with 12 points, the Timbers with 10 points. Before we got the Vancouver Whitecaps, who sadly, I have to mention that they are still the only team in the entire league to not have double-digit point total, and they're still stuck at 5 points apiece right now. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it in terms of the match week number 13 simulated review that I've done. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of these games? And as I said many times before, stay safe out there. Also, happy Memorial Day to everybody. And since I know I have seen a lot of people have kind of say this, I'm gonna also say it too. Thank you for all the soldiers out there that has defended our country and make the sacrifice so that we can of course have our freedom. And even during this time, unprecedented time that we are in right now, it's obviously great the fact that we got to appreciate all of those men and women that served the military and protected this country to make sure we of course have our freedom and become one of the most powerful country in the world. But yeah, either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.